I think a lot of people are kind of scared to do anything at the moment, or maybe scared to start a new business. The rest of the world's kind of on pause. So if you can jump in and start creating something, there's a lot of opportunity in that. They can generate traction. It's kind of like any startup. You can prove product market fit, then yeah, you'll get funding.
Hi, everybody. It is time to go live. It's our next conversation in the 10-session version of Create Online, which is our session devoted to figuring out resilience in this interesting time and where the intersection is between what startups can do with innovation and what the world needs right now with the pandemic going on and everything else going along. We picked the theme resilience because it is such a it's such an important thing to have in the world right now, and it just needs to be there. So I am joined right now by my colleagues, Simona, Cotin, and David Smith, and I'm also joined by Roger. Hi, Roger.
Hey, how you doing?
And how are you doing in Oxford today?
I'm doing really well, thanks, actually. Yeah, it's a really nice day outside. I wish I was there.
Excellent. And then David is joining us from the Bay Area, Napa Valley, a little bit more precisely. And Simona is joining us from London. And so just to set up the discussion a little bit, we chose Roger for our second session here because since we're looking at companies since we're looking at the theme of resilience and we're really trying to figure out how companies are adapting to this and how startups are adapting to this, Zegami is a company that has been working with Microsoft for Startups for a little while. They've been in our program, and so we've had a relationship with them, and we've been watching them. And they're about 4 years old, and they've gone through this process of trying to find their product market fit. I mean, this is what startups do, right? You have an idea, and you get it going, and then you see what can happen. That's really cool, and then you try to make sure you can actually sell it, and that's when the magic happens as far as your startup going live. And so Zegami has really been hitting their product market fit, the very first part of their product market fit, over the last maybe 6 months or so. Sometime last year is when they really noticed that medical imaging professionals were super interested in what they were doing, and that it was very easy to explain the benefits of what they were doing. And then, of course, well, you know what's happened in the last few months, and that's only helped confirm this product market fit that they have there. And so at this point, I'm going to hand it over to David Smith, who is one of our developer advocates, and let him talk to Roger about it. And we'll all ask questions at some point. And by the way, we are live streaming. This is YouTube, so anybody on the feed can ask questions at any time, and we'll work them into the discussion. Anyway, with that, over to you, Roger. Over to you, David.
I'll jump right in. Thanks, Duncan. Roger, great to talk to you again. I know we chatted last week, so just following up on that conversation. Medical imaging, let's start there. So you set up Zegami as a company that was doing medical imaging. What was it doing before the COVID situation? And then we'll get into that.
I think before COVID, we were exploring a lot of other opportunities, but not COVID related, of course. But we've been, I guess, actively working within the medical imaging space for quite a few years now with many of the collaborators that we have from the University of Oxford and other universities around here. But no, we're looking at other use cases, some around echocardiograms, which is sort of a form of imaging of the heart using ultrasound technology. We're looking at sort of microscopy, this sort of high throughput screening technique where they have these sort of automated microscopes that generate thousands and thousands of images of cells and things like that. Uh-huh. And then we've also been exploring other uses, specifically looking at digital pathology slides. So it might be, say, like a slice of liver or something of somebody, and kind of looking for, what are the kinds of cells and things that make up that slide. Obviously, you can tell I haven't really got a medical background, so I'm sort of just talking in general terms. about things. But yeah, sort of more of a software guy. But yeah, sort of focusing on more the research side of things rather than the clinical side of medical imaging.
Okay. And what do you do with these images? Is it some kind of machine learning model you apply to them?
We do various things, yes. I mean, primarily we are a data visualization tool. And so we really feel that, the best way to understand any kind of data set, including images, is by visualizing it. And so Zegami allows you to explore these kind of large amounts of unstructured data sets in a way that easily allows you to spot patterns and outliers without needing to know how to write code or queries or anything like that. So that's sort of the primary thing. But then the additional bit that we add with machine learning is that we apply sort of various unsupervised techniques to cluster images and sort of highlight those kinds of patterns within them. So, techniques like TSNE or UMAP or even PCA are kind of these clustering techniques or dimensionality reduction type techniques where you can then sort of take lots of numbers and pull them down into one or two, and then you put them in a scatter plot. And that's how we can sort of identify sort of interesting aspects within data sets. Yeah.
So in that case, is it less about analyzing one individual image and more about finding collections of images that are alike in some way? Exactly,
yeah. And I think that's super important, especially when you're looking at developing machine learning models, because I think anyone that has worked with lots of data kind of realizes that, the quality of your reports or the quality of your visualizations are really only ever as good as the data that you put into them. And it's that whole garbage in, garbage out thing that everyone's probably familiar with that works with this kind of thing. It's exactly the same with machine learning, right? So if you put a bunch of bad images, or if you have in your training data sets, if you have any kind of biases or underrepresentation of any of your classes, that's just going to throw your models off. And so by being able to visualize it, and not just visualize maybe a subset or kind of take a random sample of your images, if you can visualize the entire data set, really get a good understanding of the shape and what it looks like, really spot where you might have problems, then you're only going to be able to create better machine learning models. And that's sort of what we're about. Right. And then on the other side, once you've got your model, then there's that explainability thing. How did your black box come up with the decision that it did, and why is it doing that? And that's where we use the clustering to help sort of identify those kind of decision boundaries. And you can sort of then explain, well, okay, it thinks this X-ray is might have COVID in it. Well, is it close to these other ones that look like COVID? And that's how it's come up to the conclusion.
Yeah. Well, that brings us to another point. Like you said, it's all about the data, but COVID's only been with us for a couple of months, right? So how do you get data to do anything?
Yeah. I mean, it's been an interesting problem. There's been quite a lot of efforts around collecting data sets for COVID, and we came across one that was put together by a postdoc researcher based in Canada. I believe his name's Joseph. I forget his last name. Sorry. But yeah, he sort of started this call for sort of a crowdsourced GitHub repository of COVID X-rays. And so we use that as a basis. But then there's also known Kaggle data sets looking at other forms of kind of pneumonias, so bacterial and viral pneumonias, sort of same thing again, chest X-rays. And so we were able to combine a lot of data sets together in order to then train a machine learning model to then sort of see if we can sort of identify and classify COVID versus
like people from all around the world then are uploading images to GitHub of COVID patients. So that's your case set. Right. And then you've also got historical data of regular pneumonias, maybe clean X-rays, and that's, I guess, in this case, your control set. And you're trying to figure out what are the differences between those two sets of images. Is that right?
That's right, yeah. So we're building a classifier. So we had four classes that we were training for.
Oh, what are the four classes?
So it's COVID, viral pneumonia, bacterial pneumonia, and healthy.
Okay, very cool.
Yeah.
All right. So we're going to jump down, I think, now. Let's talk about how you actually built that model. But let me throw it to Duncan. Anything you wanted to check in on there?
No, I think this is all great. Keep going.
All right. Okay. What about you, Simona? All right. All right. So tell me how you built this model. You've got this data. You've got images of X-rays. What comes next?
It goes through a various number of steps, and part of that involves Zegami itself, so our data visualization tool. You just sort of pour all those images in, and it's then a process of sort of making sure that the data that you have is clean and of good quality. And we actually found by doing that in the first instance that who would have thought, but actually crowdsourced images aren't that great, and there were a lot that just weren't quite right. Some of them were
not quite right in what sense? Like they were, I don't know, wrong format, wrong angle. What's the problem?
Wrong angle. It was the big one that we found. So some of them were like a sort of a side profile.
X-ray from this side kind of thing.
Exactly, yeah. And others were this sort of front on, and we wanted the ones that were front on. So then it was just a process of quickly just selecting all those ones that we could see that were side on.
Did you
and
have
just
them edited to do that, or did you have to manually go in and classify them yourselves as like the direction?
Well, I mean, this is where Zegami comes into play, because we can sort of do a first pass over them using the unsupervised machine learning. All the ones that were on the side just sort of clustered together really nicely, and then just
automatically through Zegami. Yeah.
Yep.
Oh, wow. Okay. Yeah.
And then we can just sort of go, okay, well, those are obviously wrong. So you just tag them and exclude them, and that's sort of it, really. I mean, other ones had varying levels of contrast, which I think had an effect as well. Again, there's probably a technical term for that, but some were darker than others. Yeah. So again, it's just about sort of identifying, again in Zegami, okay, those ones don't look suitable, so you can exclude them. But you can very quickly, using the clustering and Zegami, sort of then come up with that training data set to then go on to the next step.
This is so interesting. Like, it's such an important part of the process, like getting the data right, even before you go into the modeling phase, because as you were saying earlier on, garbage in, garbage out, and there are lots of issues with, especially like public image repositories, a lot of mislabeling, a lot of, bad images and so forth. And so you're saying you could actually screen through them all with this tool, filter out the stuff that you needed, filter out the stuff you didn't need, and had a nice clean data set going into the modeling phase. That's awesome.
Exactly, yeah. And that's where we feel like we had at the most value, I think, overall, is that a significant amount of time really gets spent on that sort of first part of sourcing and cleaning and preparing data. I mean, some surveys we've seen, it could be upwards of, say, 80% of your time gets spent on it. But actually, it's something that nobody really talks about. And it's almost like the price that you just have to pay, to be a proper data scientist, is that you have to kind of go through this awful process and then you've paid your dues or something like that. So everyone's sort of talking about the modeling, but not the awful bit.
Yeah, absolutely.
So one of the things that I've had in the startups that I've been talking to has been, how deep down this hole do you go with the data and cleaning up the data? I mean, do you end up where you're building classifiers so you can pre-sort the data so that you can feed better data into the rest of the system once you find patterns of bad data, or how far do you go?
I think you could go that far. I mean, that's something that we're actively looking into at the moment. I mean, and part of that is that validation bit. So it's sort of it can be an iterative cycle where you collect data, you train, you get a model, but then you need to test that model and make sure that it's right. And it's one thing to look at a confusion matrix or something like that and just sort of take, my model is 80% accurate or something like that. But actually, unless you go back and sort of confirm and sort of visually inspect those images and what's going on there, you're not really going to understand. And actually, those things can take you down the wrong path. And you might think your model is great and you roll into production, and then you all of a sudden realize that there's some big bias or some big problem in your model that you just didn't anticipate. I remember a simple example. Someone was telling me they were looking at developing a food app where you could take a photo of a plate of food and it would try and tell you what it is. And it was the same thing where they when they deployed it, they didn't realise that actually what a lot of people were doing was taking pictures of other things, taking pictures of their faces and stuff like that, and going, what food is your face? And it's only once it's in production and you start looking at those images that are coming in that you realise, oh, actually, if I just sort of had a shortcut and optimised for if I see a face, don't even bother, then you can save loads of time and sort of energy rather than trying to produce sort of a model for a specific thing, if that kind of makes sense.
No, it makes total sense.
Yeah.
I mean, it's a hard problem. What are some of the classic signs that you have some sort of weird bias in your data, other than just knowing or just noticing it as it's trying to process and you get garbage out?
I think what we found is it's just where you get a lot of overlap more often than not, or you sort of see a certain trend. So where again, it comes down to visualizing the images and seeing where they cluster. But for example, like when I was saying with the X-rays, how some turn out darker than others. Well, if you you can sort of start to spot a trend where if dark image means that it's COVID, for example, then actually you might have built yourself a classifier that can just identify dark X-rays. And that's a really tricky problem, I guess, to unpick and understand why. And again, that's why visualizing it sort of really helps to understand, oh, okay, these are all dark for some reason and they're all COVID. How can that be?
Yeah, that's like my favorite example of that is there's a famous example in machine learning where somebody tried to build a model that could identify wolves from huskies.
Oh, yes, I know this one.
You know this one? Yeah, it sounds really impressive that they have this model that could tell dogs that look kind of similar from each other, and it was super accurate. But it turned out the only reason it was accurate, and even then only on the training set, was because the model had trained itself to identify snow in the picture. And all the pictures of the wolves had snow in the frame, and all the pictures of huskies were in houses and didn't. And so it was accurate on that training set. But as soon as you gave it like a real live wolf or husky without that context in the background, the model completely failed. And it's why it's so important to understand what the data is and make sure it's correctly labeled and they don't have these sort of subtle biases in it that you don't even recognize during that process.
Exactly, yeah. And one of the other things that we found is really helpful with that is, so that also is an annotation problem where, you've got say the picture of the husky and you've drawn a bounding box around it. And so it actually contains snow in the box. Right. And so a better way is to use something like MaskGusCNN or YOLO, where it's actually a segmentation mask that you create. Uh-huh. And then every pixel is only wolf pixel or husky pixel, and you get a much better model. Yeah.
So what kind of model worked for you for the lung X-ray data?
Doug's probably going to kill me. He's the data scientist that we had that actually built this. I'm pretty sure it was based on a ResNet 50 architecture, but I'm not 100% sure. I really need to get him to write a blog post or something on a technical deep dive on what he did there. But I know he spent a bit of time looking at sort of various data augmentations as well, just to sort of increase the amount of trading data we had. Yeah. But I think it was a ResNet 50. I'm not exactly sure.
If it was the ResNet architecture pre-trained using transfer learning on top of that, or did you train a model from scratch?
I'm pretty sure I was using transfer learning as well.
Okay, that's really interesting. Like I've always wondered about that, like how well transfer learning works for things that are not photographs. Like the typical ImageNet, for example, doesn't have any pictures of X-rays in it.
Right.
But, can it learn enough from regular photographs of things in the world that it transfers over into things like X-rays or, cell microscopy, whatever that word is, and so on. Because I've had a lot of questions about that. Like, can you apply these transfer learning to these weird kinds of things that are photographs but not quite photographs? And I've never really been quite sure. So it's interesting to hear that there's an application there that's working.
Yeah, we've had varying success using that, and it does depend, on what it's been trained with. I think ImageNet's quite nice because it's actually quite a diverse amount of categories or classes that it's been trained on. So it's sort of quite generic in those those middle layers there,
Yeah.
And so it's just depending on where you make that cut as to go, okay, we'll train everything after that.
Right, yeah.
So, yeah, like I said, I can't speak on the specific details on what we did for COVID, but I know from experience I've done something similar with satellite images. And I try to identify different types of roof housing, so house roofing.
Yeah.
And, that worked really well.
Yeah, I've seen that used for like city planning, like cities here in California flying drones or using satellite image to figure out like how many houses are around. Like it's almost like magic to me that like transfer learning even works at all. Like, you can just translate this completely different set of images to this completely other image style. And, it's pretty cool stuff. Let's talk about the data. Like, how much data have you got when you build this model?
This was actually, I wouldn't say it was a lot. And this is part of really, I think, to make the model more robust, we need obviously a lot more. But in total, it was in the order of, say, 600, 650 images all up. And then, as I said, we did some transformations on the images as well to sort of bulk out the training set. But it wasn't thousands, that's for sure.
Right. Okay. So that it almost certainly was transfer learning then, if you had that number of images. Yeah. But even so, 650 images, probably 5-10 megs each. It's a decent chunk of data. I mean, what did you use to actually do the training? I'm sure it wasn't your laptop.
So yeah, we use a combination of cloud computing for that, and then some of it is done on our laptops as well. So Doug, who did this,
some nice laptops.
He's got I think it's his gaming machine.
All right.
So he's got a pretty nice video card in there, which he did a lot there. But for a lot of other stuff, then we use our cloud environment.
That's right. Yeah, I totally use the video card in my laptop for all sorts of modeling and not playing Civilization or anything like that. But so what kind of tools do you use? Like, is this TensorFlow? Is it something else?
TensorFlow. Okay. I think from what I know, we have been using, Keras as well to sort of wrap around some of the TensorFlow stuff. Yeah. I know the stuff we'd done previously was in, TensorFlow 1.11 or something. But Doug's been working lately in TensorFlow 2, which I think comes with the Keras stuff bundled in. Yeah. It's been a little while since I've done a lot of that sort of stuff, but it's mostly TensorFlow based. And then when we're training the cloud, we've got a Kubernetes cluster that we spin up. So most everything we do is sort of containerized, so that we can sort of then fan out any jobs that we run. Okay.
And so with the Kubernetes cluster, it's distributed training then, I'm guessing, which is out of you can do that with ResNet, I think.
Yeah, I think it was with it definitely, our image processing side of things is parallelized. The training, I think it is too, with the new stuff with TensorFlow can be,
Yeah. Okay. Yeah. And then finally, when you've trained this model, like, have you plugged it back into Zegami? Like, how do people actually apply the model to the image?
Yeah, that's the neat thing about Zegami, is sort of you can then complete the loop there and then sort of inference new images or just use the model as an overlay. So again, we do the unsupervised clustering, and then we overlay colors on the from the unsupervised to the supervised classification. So then you can sort of get a sense for how well the classes are clustered together.
So when you say overlaying the colors, like, that's like I upload an image of an X-ray and it tells me where the pneumonia is, or?
Yeah, so we can sort of add a color tint, sort of color overlay over the top of an image to add an additional dimension. So in effect, then it looks like a scatter plot, but it's a scatter plot of images.
So each point is like, this is many images visualized all at once.
Yep.
Gotcha.
Yep. Exactly. Yeah. Yeah. So that's sort of the thing with Zegami. We've sort of built this image processing pipeline in the cloud that can sort of consume and then process, tens of thousands of images and then visualize them all at once. So that's sort of part of that Kubernetes backend that we've built there, sort of for parallelized image processing.
Yeah. And so what the idea then is, like, a doctor would have Zegami in their lab, take an X-ray, and then have a look at that and use it as a diagnostic tool?
I think as a guide rather than a explicit sort of diagnostic. So it'd be something that they could look at the image, and then it helps with that explainability piece. So they can say, look, this may or may not be COVID, but actually I can see where it sits within the actual verified cases of COVID, and they can then make a more informed decision about whether it is or isn't. So yeah, wouldn't necessarily make claims it's a diagnostic tool per se, but really it's a time-saving tool. Ultimately, there's increasing pressure, and there's sort of radiologists are in short supply. Yeah. And I'm hearing actually that there's something like 30% are due to retire in the next 3 years or 5 years or something. So there's sort of a lot of demand for them and demand on their time. And I think AI and AI-based tools can really help with their workflow and really assist with sort of increasing and improving sort of patient outcomes more than anything.
Yeah, cool.
Yeah.
So Simona, you had a question. Yeah.
Yeah. And I was curious, Roger, you mentioned there that you and your team have built a data or an image processing pipeline in the cloud. And I was curious, was that something that you've built over the past 4 years? And how was that? How was the experience of pivoting to these COVID-19 analysis based off of your existing software that you've built in the past 4 years?
Sure. So yes, so we have this sort of image processing backend where you can feed in any kind of image, and then we sort of pick that up, and we can sort of pull out and extract additional metadata from those images, and then do the unsupervised clustering and sort of the other things that I've talked about. But I guess really because we originally started looking at more research-based images, and then over time have been looking at so many varied types of data and image, both in the kind of regular ones that you kind of generally expect, as well as sort of some of the more bizarre kind of medical and proprietary formats. We sort of have, over that 4 years seen it all, and also seen a lot of, bad, messy, images, corrupted images, all that kind of stuff. And so really we're at a point now where you could sort of throw anything at it and it would be quite happy. It'll just keep, chugging along, processing images and you get something at the end. But yeah, it's taken quite a long time to build that, just because, images, not everyone thinks of them as data, but I see, an image is just another piece of data. But the problem with images, even if you're saying you can process 1,000 images, actually that's quite a lot. It's a lot of data. They can be really big. They're difficult to move, and can sometimes be quite CPU intensive to process. And so it's taken us quite a while to build something that is robust enough to be able to handle anything you can throw at it. Yeah, we have a good team. This is sort of, I guess, what I'm saying. Yeah.
That's awesome. And does that mean that basically, as this whole new situation unveiled, when you and your team had to sit down and make a decision, or basically explore this idea of, hey, we want to explore different data sets and we want to see if we can help in this new worldwide set, how did that go? Like, when was what triggered that moment where you said that, hey, I'm going to go ahead and explore this data set and actually try to make sense of everything that's happening?
I think it was really early on when the lockdown started happening, and we really wanted to see if there's a way that we can, help in any form, really. And we actually looked at a few different areas where we might be able to add some value, because, really, I think, even in a small way, if everyone can help, then, hopefully we can get out of this horrible situation a lot quicker. So actually, originally we were looking at a large data set that was released of academic publications sort of relating to COVID. I think it was sort of in the order of 50 or 60,000 just sort of journals and papers and that sort of thing. We thought, oh, wouldn't that be great if we put them all in Zegami, and then you could use some maybe more natural language processing techniques to start to cluster the documents based on themes. And we explored that for a bit, and in the end we didn't feel like we were adding a lot of value over existing tools. It was just kind of cool, but not really super useful. And that's when we then came across this other crowdsourced data set of images, and we thought, well, this is perfect for us. This really fits within what we do best, and really highlights not only what we do, but hopefully makes those kinds of data sets more accessible to others.
Very cool. Very cool. So when you decided to make that change, what was the biggest challenge, or what was the oh crap moment, or what was the thing that caught you off guard?
I'm trying to think. I mean, for one, it was I think for us was actually the interest that we got out of it. I mean, we to date we've got loads of interest out of that collection. That was something that wasn't quite expected. I mean, you kind of hope that we can contribute in some way, but since then we've been featured in not only sort of national press here in the UK, but also in a lot of papers globally. But then it's sort of led on to a lot of the opportunities where previously it's been quite difficult to break into and we'll break out of academia into sort of more commercial research, or break into having real meaningful conversations with some of the bigger vendors and sort of software vendors out there that are kind of managing X-rays and these kind of medical images, or even dealing with over here in the UK, the NHS or the hospital system. And since then, it's been really nice to see that they've been a lot more open to talking with us and sort of really understanding how Zegami could be useful. So it's been, it has been surprising how quickly that a lot of those conversations have happened, where it's felt like prior to that it's sort of been years of effort to try and sort of build up and get those relationships moving.
So is that just an indication of how much the red tape is falling in response to the crisis, or is that something else?
It's probably a bit of both. I mean, I think one of the really cool things that's come out of this whole the whole crisis is that people one is sort of a lot more accepting of people working from home, and there's sort of a need that we all have to, and so I think that's kind of broken down a lot of old world thinking about how people work and collaborate. And I think it's the same thing with the cloud, and sort of really opened up a lot of people to realize, okay, well, people are working from home, it's so much easier to access and work with the cloud than it was before. And a lot of those sort of barriers of the cloud is big and scary, and don't want it's unsafe to put my data in there, I think is really quickly disappearing, and people understand that they need to adapt. And so I think a lot of that is sort of driving that as well. So it's sort of a bit of a moment that has sort of it's just a different way of thinking that as the COVID thing is sort of enabled, I think, more than anything.
Mm-hmm. And how about your own team? Like, in the middle of all this, of course, doing all this work to support the medical imaging and working with the hospitals in a new way, how's your own team been reacting to working at home and all the differences?
Well, it's been challenging. It's some people I think thrive, but it's probably not for everyone either. Like, not everyone likes being at home, by themselves, working like that. But I think in general, for us, it feels like in a lot of ways we've been preparing for this for quite a long time, in that we have quite a flexible working from home policy, which people take up pretty regularly, and we've sort of made a constant shift to using video calls and to having meetings sort of in an ad hoc way over video, as opposed to waiting till everyone's in the office. And that's in part because we have a remote testing team as well that we're sort of in constant communication with, and we also have contractors and other people that we work with that are remote. So we're just sort of used to working in that kind of way. So really, it was sort of it almost felt like we were productive from day one, that we just sort of picked up our laptops and walked out the building, and we kept on going.
How do you keep the team in contact with each other? Like, how do you replace that water cooler conversation? How do you replace, I'm just going to step over to someone's desk and ask a question? Like, when you've gone into this whole remote thing, like, how do you keep that? Synergy is a weird word, but how do you keep that together?
Yeah, that's tough. And I guess that comes down to, trying to have that culture that's a bit resilient, and that you can, use technology to replace the kind of the being in a physical place. So we use Slack internally for a lot of our communication, and so there's lots of jokes and things get posted in there, as you can imagine, and then it's other things like we have regular sort of social meetups now over video, where we might do a quiz, or we have sort of a virtual beer at the pub. Yeah. You just have to kind of do those kinds of things instead. So rather than it's almost sort of like that I would say mandatory fun, but it's sort of a scheduled fun time, where normally just on a Friday it's quite natural maybe to kick off and go to the pub in the afternoon. We have to book it in now.
Yeah, no, that's
an interesting idea. I heard from a friend of mine is they've been scheduling like 2-hour meetings that people join on Slack or Teams or whatever, and there's no actual meeting. All they're doing is just doing their regular work, but they're all connected together through whatever during the process. And they were saying it's good because you're just doing your regular job, but when you want to ask somebody a question, or when you want to just say something, people are right there for you. And I thought I'd never seen that kind of thing before. It seemed really interesting, and I'd love to try that sometime.
Actually, yeah, it's something we've tried a couple of times where, so we've been applying for a couple of grants for around this project and a few others. And, pulling together a grant is sort of a process of just writing lots of words on a big document. And we've been having these calls that have gone for literally 6 or 7 hours.
Oh, wow.
But just all sort of writing on our own sections, but just with a sort of a live feed. And I think it works. It can be quite intense and quite tiring at the end. I feel quite exhausted, to be honest, but it surprisingly works really well.
That's good.
I recommend trying it.
No, it sounds great. I mean, the funny thing is that in developer advocacy and Microsoft for Startups both, we're totally remote teams. I mean,
right.
Simona's in London, Davidson in California, I'm in Berlin. The rest of my team, my boss is in Australia. So, but we haven't done this particular thing, and that sounds like a really awesome idea. I like that.
Yeah, as long as you probably got some time zone issues there as well, so you probably couldn't do 6 or 7 hours. But
no, we have tried. We have tried the coffee hours, like where we do coffee hour twice a day or something like that. And that's been useful, but not just the kind of the open space thing that you're talking about.
I've heard people doing it sometimes where they might have in a physical office, they might just have a screen up with maybe a remote worker that's sort of constantly broadcasting, and so you could almost sort of walk up to them and just have a bit of a chat.
That's cool.
This is, it's something. One of the offices we're in last, they did that where they almost had like a kind of a big screen up, and then you could see the other office through there. So it was almost like a teleport wall or something where you could sort of see exactly what they were doing in the remote office. Which again, you got to try these things, don't you? Because there's lots of different ways.
And I think if you only have 1 or 2 remote workers, that could really help with their sense of isolation and not being connected with the team. Yeah.
At the same time, I do feel like when working remote, I think one of the best parts of all of us in the advocacy team being remote is exactly this. Like, all of us being remote is a lot easier, because otherwise, if you have half of the team that is on site and half of the team that is remote, it can quickly turn into optimizing for the team that is on site, and then it turns very quickly into a situation where we, especially with different time zones, we don't necessarily create an inclusive behavior. So I think in that sense, with all of us being locked down, it also helps with educating teams to empathize with everyone else that is usually remote if you're on site regularly.
Yeah, definitely. It's easy to forget people as well, I guess, if you got the office, you just have a quick meeting and then you go, oh, that's right, I forgot I need to set up or book a meeting or something, meeting room, just to have this person involved. One way we tried to solve that, which I think we were getting close to having, was just a permanent screen set up in the office that you could just sort of drop into at any time. So our remote testers could just sort of drop into this screen and then just ask a question sort of to the room, as a way of sort of trying to break down that and sort of help to, reinforce that they're here and they're just part of the team, and you can call them anytime if needed.
Yeah. Did you feel, Roger, that with this new kind of pivot, did you feel like you had to connect more often with your team? And were there moments where you felt like, hey, we need alignment and we need to make trade-offs in terms of, I imagine that, let's say 3 months ago or 6 months ago, you had set out a roadmap for your product. And you actually mentioned earlier that you're also in conversations with VCs, and I'm curious, like how you've defined those trade-offs, and how is that helping you in the current conversations that you're having?
So the trade-offs with what?
From a roadmap perspective, like you had a certain plan for your product, and now pivoted to address different parts of your product. Like, did that come completely natural, or did you have to make some trade-offs?
Yeah, I mean, there's always sort of trade-offs with a product roadmap for sure. It's sort of weighing the opinions and the views of a lot of different people, as well as with our sort of more company goals. So yeah, I mean that's always been a challenge, I think. I suppose for us, we've always been trying to build a fairly data agnostic platform. And that's sort of why we have that image processing system that we do, and that it can sort of handle any kind of data. But that, at the same time, is one of these focusing problems where if you build something that's too generic and too much of a platform, then who is it actually useful for, and do they really get any value out of it over something else? And for us, it's just a process of constantly looking at the data and constantly trying to understand and quantify our customers more than anything. And so, it's been a long and sort of difficult process to get to the point where we have with the product. And I think we're close. We're constantly working towards it, that's for sure. But yeah, you never make everyone happy.
No, it's definitely impossible to make everybody happy, but we try. So do you ever see a time when we go back, or looking forward, do you actually see that we're going to settle into something like, I hate to use the phrase new normal, but a new normal when it comes to how we do this?
This is something I've thought about a lot, because in a lot of ways this is quite nice, being able to work in the way that we have. I think it's forced us into patterns and behaviours that we are more collaborative, and we do communicate a lot more. And anything that we do communicate, you almost have to over-communicate. Again, which I think is good patterns, so that everybody, even the remote workers, knows exactly what we're doing. And I hope that kind of stuff continues. It's going to be hard to say. I mean, I almost can see a place where a lot of people would go, well, why do I need an office anymore? I was actually quite productive working from home, or in this new way of thinking. And could we get away with a smaller office, or no office at all even? And I think that's a pretty sensible question to be having, really. And the case may be that we do keep the office, but at least we understand the purpose of the office and why we need it, rather than, again, being driven by that old world thinking of we need to have something physical with chairs and a desk in order to function or work. So I think that's one of the big outcomes, yeah.
Definitely. I mean, one of the things that we've seen in various teams that I've been exposed to is that tension between like the introverts and the extroverts and the people who need to go off in a hole and work on their own versus come together. And I kind of hope, who knows if this is actually how this is going to work out, but I kind of hope that where we end up is I can go away from the office when I need my solo time, or I can obviously connect easily via electronic form, but we use the office for that extrovert time. And that way people can kind of come and go at their own tolerance levels.
Yeah, definitely. I mean, that's something I quite like. I mean, you know, I sort of have always been a bit of introvert. That's sort of my developer background. Not that all developers are introverts, but it tends to be a bit of a typecast. But it's been quite nice to, you know, to try and find that happy balance there where you can, you know, get away and sort of just turn off all communication and get that thing that you need to get done, sort of go into the cave and produce that report. But then you can come out again and and talk to everyone and it's fine.
We have a great question from Ian McDonald. He's asking whether you could see a time where you just meet at a pub or a WeWork or somewhere as opposed to actually having your own office. Like skip all the working in an office, just go out for pints and wine and tea.
It sounds ideal to me. I don't know how much work I'd get done though.
Well, and of course that assumes that like WeWork or something like that is actually existing in a few more months or years or whatever that is.
That's true.
But that's a whole different can of worms there.
But if every office becomes essentially like a co-working space, like as opposed to a place where you have your desk and your cubicle, a place where you go to meet people, like, well, we still need third-party co-working spaces after that.
Right.
Yeah, that's true. Yeah, it's hard to say.
It's very tough to say. I mean, who knows? I know that one startup business I wouldn't want to be in right now is real estate. And sorry to anybody who's listening in that is that is what they're in. But that's going to be a set of challenges.
Absolutely.
So I'm curious in terms of like next steps and in terms of where do you see Zegami going forward, Roger? Do you see progressing in this on this path of that you're currently on, or are there any other things that you're exploring at the moment with your team?
Yeah, I mean, we're actively exploring how Zegami can be of more use, more on the clinical side of things within kind of the medical imaging space. So a lot of what we've been doing to date has been sort of what they call the preclinical or the research side of things. But, you know, is there a path where Zegami could be in front of a radiologist or a doctor or something like that? And that sort of gets really exciting. I think because that's at the point where it really feels like we're able to make a difference to a lot of people. But really, our big vision for Zegami is just it to be the platform for dealing with any kind of images or any kind of visual data in kind of a way of sort of thinking is almost like Excel for images, right? Where, you know, there's sort of these structured data tools out there that everyone's sort of really familiar with. But what about the unstructured data? What about all that data where there's so much of it, but it's just so difficult to really extract value and really extract information from? And I think we see that we have a really big contribution to play in sort of changing that paradigm in the way people access unstructured data.
So imagine that you've got a colleague or a friend or a group of friends who are working in one of those places where things are a lot less certain. Like obviously Zegami's in a good place. It sounds like you guys are going to be moving forward quite well. But what about like, what would your advice be to your colleagues that are out there at a company that's maybe things are a little more tenuous or things are a lot more tenuous depending on what the case may be?
I think, like anything, you just got to make the most of the opportunities as they present themselves, and that's sort of, I guess, in part what we did. We sort of thought, well, how could we, you know, be dynamic and adapt to this situation and also have a positive contribution. And I think it's the same thing for anyone. It's about how can you adapt to the situation, and it's hard for a lot of companies to do that. But I kind of feel like, and sort of what we've already talked about a bit, is that I think there's going to be a lot of opportunities that come out of this whole situation, and it's those that are able to sort of think creatively and adapt to the situation that are going to come out on top. It's hard to be specific, more specific than that, I think, in general, really. But it's just being adaptable to the new paradigm.
No, definitely. I mean, that's a key part of that resilience that we're all needing to look for and get a hold of. All right, so we're almost done with our time here, but there's a couple of fun questions that I've been wanting to start getting into this series and have a little bit of playtime with. So let me ask you this: what is the one thing that you missed the most, or you found yourself missing the most while you've been sitting at home doing the work and on lockdown?
Actually, I kind of miss the commute to some extent. It's sort of that little bit of a mental break. I get to listen to a podcast, as I go into the office. I get to, I've got about a 20-minute walk from the train station into the office. And so I kind of miss that little bit of a downtime almost, more than anything.
Yeah, no, I haven't had a commute in years, but it's definitely the appealing of getting out and just having some of that transition time between work.
I think that's it. Yeah. I mean, not everyone has a great commute, but yeah.
I feel exactly the same way. Like, I've been working from home for a good 10 years now, so that side of it is familiar, but I miss the travel because that was always my commute. Like, planes was the time when I caught up on books, when I caught up on TV shows I was watching, when I just had time to chill out and do nothing. And I haven't had that for so long, and I really miss it.
Exactly, yeah.
That's I miss flying. Anyway, let's not go down that route. What is the thing that you found yourself unexpectedly enjoying a lot during this time?
Snacking. It's been nice just to walk to the fridge and, I don't know, get some cheese or something.
Dangerous.
So yeah, it is dangerous. Yeah, I'm hopefully not going to put on too much weight, but yeah, I've sort of been cheekily snacking.
And if there's one thing that you could go back in time and tell yourself, say you could pop back to January and say, okay, here's one thing you need to know, what would that be?
That is a good question. I think it's I'd probably say it's going to be okay. Really, it's I think remember when we first set out and we had the lockdowns, there was sort of lots of unknowns and weren't sure what to do, how things were going to go. I spent a lot of time reassuring the team and making sure that everything's going to be okay. But then I myself wasn't sure if everything was going to be okay. But it's turned out quite fine, actually. And like I said, it's I don't mind working from home, and it hasn't been as much of a challenge. So, yeah, I think that's what I'd say to myself.
That's awesome. I mean, so you mentioned one of those interesting dynamics that we find ourselves, any leader finds themselves in, which is how to be reassuring while not being sure.
Right.
Do you have a maybe a trick is the right way to put that, or something, a way that you can actually do that, or?
Nothing that comes to mind. It's just sort of, I guess about being real with people more than anything. So it's sort of you're not sort of projecting a kind of like a false confidence or anything like that, because it's we're all in this together, right? So it's not just others that may be feeling anxious, but I'm feeling anxious as well, and I think it's being kind of open and honest about that maybe kind of puts that human side on things and kind of makes people feel like that they're not this alone. They're in this. We're all in this together. So yeah, I think that's my approach anyway.
No, that's a very human approach and a very empathetic approach. That's we all could use a little bit of that coaching from time to time, for sure. All right. Well, thank you so much for joining us today. This has been a lovely conversation to have, and to really get insight on a startup where you actually, not only are you kind of at that, the threshold of crossing product market fit, but you're seeing product market fit being illustrated in such a powerful way. And I really hope that the technologies that you all are working on actively do help the medical doctors out there and help get through their diagnosis as fast. I mean, after all, we don't see that much coming in from like imagery or stories from the hospitals, but the thing that seems to be really obvious is that people are overloaded. People don't have enough time. They need all the help they can get. And
absolutely, yeah.
And even if the stuff that you're doing is giving them just, a multiplier boost on what they can do, that's so awesome. So thank you. And from all of us, we hope you guys keep just rocking it.
No worries. Yeah, no, thanks so much for having me. It's been great to meet you all.
Yep. And so this is the end of session 2. We do have another session coming up next week. And after that, we'll have another session. So our guest next week will be Brian Fitzpatrick from Chicago. He is a longtime CTO and CEO and has written all sorts of information online about how to be a good leader. And then after that, we have Laura Hogan, which is going to be an awesome guest to have. And we will have that schedule coming up on our website, which is aka.ms/create. And for that, I wish you all a good evening or a good morning or a good whatever time it is for you. And we'll talk to you again soon.
Bye.
Ciao.
I think a lot of people are kind of scared to do anything at the moment, or maybe scared to like start a new business. The rest of the world's kind of on pause. So if you can jump in and start creating something, there's a lot of opportunity in that. They can generate traction. It's kind of like any startup. You can prove product market fit, then yeah, you'll get funding.
I think went well.
Yeah. Awesome.
Is it the interview format, or is it the what bit was new?
The live interview format. So I've sort of had interviews before, say with journalists or something like that, but it's sort of just been like a phone call or a bit of an offline conversation. So yeah, live is definitely a new experience.
I hope this was enjoyable, as new as it was. We didn't have as many questions coming in from the chat, but I think that's also because this is an advanced topic, and
right.
Maybe folks they aren't as familiar with it. But I think it was really great to hear from you, to hear from your story, and then David, you are awesome as well on the technical bit.
It was a fascinating topic. Thanks for letting me run down that rabbit hole, Roger.
No, that's no problem. Yeah, like I said, a lot of people, I find their eyes glaze over when you start talking about data, but it's something that I'm, super passionate about and sort of been working with for a long time now. And I hope, everyone gets it because it's so important.
Yeah, and this thing about Zegami being like an image preview, pre-processing tool, like that, there's something there. Like, I've spent so much time with images and you just can't look at it at all. And you just kind of feel like, I just don't know what's going into the model and I'm just not sure about it. But, if there was some way that you could get a sense of where there might be errors, especially in the tagging data, I want to play around with that some more, actually.
Stream, just so you know.
Well, I mean, a super relevant sort of interesting example is someone we're working with recently, and now looking to, clean up a data set to make sure that it was, good to distribute more widely, and it contained, a lot of sensitive data from patients, those kinds of things, and they wanted to make sure it was, completely clean, and they'd done a lot of work to, strip out any metadata from the headers that you get in the image, but some of the images themselves actually contained a screen that had patient information on it. Mm-hmm. So it was a screenshot from a video. It wasn't metadata.
Right.
And so we're talking about, I think it's 25,000 images, but only 10 of them contained this, this information.
And probably nobody ever knew, right, until someone discovered it. Yeah.
Right. So it was actually, we had the collection and we loaded up the other day just to review it. And we looked at it, and then you can just instantly spot, what's these ones? These look a bit different from the rest. That's odd. Zoom in, look at them. Oh my goodness, that shouldn't be there. And so we could spot literally 10 images out of the 25,000 that had a problem and just excluded them.
That's awesome.
Then it was fine, and it took seconds.
Yeah.
So, question for you: what, as a guest, from your perspective, I'm going to be brave because we are streaming our debrief here. Yes, the people who are commenting are correct. We did it last time, and it's a nice little gag or nice little fun thing, so we're doing it again. But from your perspective, what can we do better to help host something like this?
I think it was really good. To start with, I was just a little unsure what I'd gotten myself into more than anything, and so I just wanted to, understand the format a bit more. And I guess it's new for you. I mean, it's the second time you've run around, but I think it was really helpful. You sent through just kind of a quick snapshot of what it was going to look like, sort of a breakdown on, a bit of Q&A, a bit of an intro, a bit of a tech deep dive, and so that really helped me anyway to sort of mentally prepare for, okay, I can do this. I know what to expect. I know what's coming up. Apart from that, I can't think of anything else. It was it was good. It came together pretty quickly too. I don't think it was less than a week maybe since at least I heard about it. So yeah, I think again it's one of those adaptability things. We're able to pull it together, and yeah, it was fun.
Cool. Glad to hear. Well, if you think of anything, please do.
Sure.
Do let us know, because this is going to be in the best of startup fashions: rapid iteration, move fast, break things, fix them, see if we can get to the end of this in good shape. But I'm already just really incredibly happy with and excited by just the 2 conversations we've had, and I can't wait for the next 8. So great.
Cool. Yeah.
All right. Well, with that, I will really close the live stream. Have a good night, y'all, or have a good day, everybody.